It happened in a blink, not on a red carpet, not on the BBC, not even in a Hollywood backlot flooded with spotlights. No, this was different, raw, unexpected, and it sent the internet, and more specifically, Irish Twitter, into a kind of joyous nationalistic meltdown. Cillian Murphy, Oscar winner, fashion icon, the walking enigma, did something profoundly. Ordinary. Fans spotted it, froze it, shared it 1,000,000 times over. They said, this right here is peak Irish. This man is being a true Irishman. And somehow, in that tiny, blinking doomsday gesture, we got a glimpse under the careful mask of the most mysterious actor in modern cinema. But to understand why that one moment, just a cup in his hand and a glance over his shoulder, felt so deliciously Irish, you need to understand who Cillian Murphy is, why he's so different, and how he became the most reluctant superstar of our time. It was a windy, October morning on the streets of Dublin, pedestrians scattering past Booley's Cafe on Grafton Street. Autumn leaves fluttered behind them like stage curtains, and there, quietly tucked in the corner of a frame in someone else's selfie, was him, Murphy. No entourage, no designer sunglasses, no brooding Tommy Shelby posture. Just Cillian, holding a plastic bag with what looked very much like a sliced pan, peeking out. And in his other hand, the real star of the show was a cup of tea. Not a sleek, reusable tumbler. Not a celebrity endorsement deal, just a builder's brew. White plastic lid, fan zoomed, analyzed, enhanced, and then erupted into laughter. Because, of course, Cillian Murphy walked through Dublin with a sliced pan and a cuppa like he just nipped around the corner from his mams. Because, of course, he didn't try to be incognito, even though he effortlessly was. Because, of course, ladies and gentlemen, he is a true Irishman. But this wasn't just a funny moment, it was revelatory. Because you see, for all the blinding fame, the awards, the front row seats next to designers and directors, Cillian Murphy has spent his entire career doing one extraordinary thing that hardly any celebrity these days dares to do. He stays himself, rigidly, quietly, even when no one's looking. He wasn't built in Hollywood boardrooms. He didn't step off the teen idol conveyor belt the way many of his peers did. Cillian grew up in Cork, in Douglas, south of the River Lee, in a modest household with a school inspector for a dad and a French teacher for a mom. Not actors, not agents, teachers. And if you speak to anyone who knew the Murphys back then, they say the same thing. They were grounded, fair, full of music and fire and books. That fire, it turns out, would flicker in Cillian early on, not in acting. Oddly enough, but in music, he was meant to be a rock star. He was in a band with his brother. They called themselves Sons of Mr. Green Jeans, a nod to Frank Zappa. Cool, esoteric, so Cillian. Their gigs. Sweaty, loud, powerful, and Murphy, he wasn't at the back strumming chords. He was the front man. Eyes half closed, hair in. His face, voice defiant. But here's the twist. Even then, when ego could have taken over, when the spotlight began to feel warm, he recoiled from fame, turned down a record deal because he felt it was too controlling, and all this long before Peaky Blinders. Long before Batman Begins, long before that face, sharp cheekbones, glacial eyes, would become one of the most recognizable in cinema. The boy from Cork wasn't chasing stardom. He was chasing truth. His first major break came in the form of Darren the cracked, howling, heartbreakingly feral lead in Disco Pigs, a role that left audiences stunned, a performance that felt less like acting and more like therapy. Raw, demanding, totally without vanity. But what really set him apart wasn't the intensity, it was the refusal to perform beyond the role. He didn't do talk shows much. He rarely posed for paparazzi. When asked about fame, he'd shrug, say something like, it's just noise, not real. That kind of detachment doesn't just take discipline, it takes grit. It takes a man who knows where he's from so deeply. It anchors him even when the entire world tells him to let go. Fans noticed, especially Irish fans, because in Murphy, they saw something rare. Not just representation, but recognition. The quiet strength, the unwillingness to explain oneself, the dark humor edged with affection, the terrible tea, the awkward wave, the deep respect for the mammy. He once told The Guardian, sitting in a quiet pub sipping a pint, "You can't take Cork out of the man." And you believe him when he says that. Because this isn't a man trying to win your heart. He's just being himself, and in an industry obsessed with reinvention. That's radical. So when the image of Murphy just walking down the street, with a loaf of bread and a takeout tea hit the internet, suddenly everyone remembered who he really was. Not just the actor who played Tommy Shelby with ice in his voice. Not the Academy Award winner who stood delicately stunned at the Oscars whispering thanks in his smoky baritone. Not the fashion icon in Prada coats or the surrealist lead of Christopher Nolan's magnum opus. No. They saw Cillian from Cork. The kid who still drinks tea like it cures everything. Who still wears old jumpers until they fall apart. A toe. Walks instead of being driven. Who, rumor has it, still takes the bus. Do you feel it? That gentle swell in your chest. That's what it means to be seen. Because Murphy didn't win his countrymen over with noise. He did it with quiet, with stillness. With the rare courage to say, "I don't need to be anyone else." And in that moment, the tea, the bread. The side-glanced Irish fans didn't just laugh. They celebrated because when they saw him, they saw their brother, their father, their pal. They saw the Ireland that's never in the headlines. The Ireland that doesn't beg for attention but deserves it all the same. Fame usually wants to change you. Cillian Murphy, somehow, used it to become more himself. But this isn't just a story about a man who stayed Irish. This is a story about what staying rooted really means, through success, through silence, through the chaos of celebrity. So we're going to go deeper, because while Murphy seems effortless, his journey has been anything but easy. There were roles that nearly broke him, anxieties that stalked him, fame that threatened to drown him again and again. And yes, there are so many reasons why. When he walks down a Dublin street holding just a loaf of bread and a cup of tea, it feels like the proudest, funniest, truest image his fans have ever seen. In part 2 of this story, we'll dive beneath the still waters, into the storm behind the calm. The roles that carved pieces out of him, the loyalty that tethered him to home, and the one moment far from the cameras when Cillian Murphy disappeared and no one could find him. In a world driven by noise, Cillian Murphy remains quiet. It's not a personality quirk or a clever PR move. It's a choice, stubborn and sacred, refined over years of fame, knocking at his door, louder and louder. But what happens when that quiet gets too loud to bear? Because here's the truth. For all the jokes and warmth, when fans saw him being a true Irishman, Cillian's silence hasn't come without its scars. It hasn't always been as simple as tea, bread, and down-to-earth charm. There were moments when Cillian flinched from fame so violently. He nearly disappeared. It was supposed to be his time. He had just stunned as the chilling Dr. Jonathan Crane in Batman Begins caught the attention of Danny Boyle with 28 Days Later and brought shattering vulnerability to Breakfast on Pluto. A performance that pushed boundaries at a time when few actors dared. People around him whispered Oscar. Alistair, leading man. But Murphy wasn't listening. Instead, he was slipping further off the map. He once admitted it to an interviewer. "More like a confession, really," he said. The idea of being recognized everywhere, that's my worst nightmare. I want the work to speak, not me. At the height of it all, a friend recalls him vanishing for weeks. No public appearances, no press junkets, just gone. Where did he go? Home to the sea air and wet skies of Ireland, to old friends who didn't care what magazine cover he was on, to pubs where nobody asked for selfies, just stories, to his family, wife Yvonne, sons Malaki and Aaron, where love wasn't conditional. You see, Arifi crafted a strategy most celebrities wouldn't dare. He didn't fight fame, he didn't feed it. Instead, he starved it. He gave interviews only when he had something to say. Never lived in Los Angeles, wore the same well-fitted suit to red carpets like it was armor, not fashion, and lived wholeheartedly in Ireland. It's not that he hated fame, he just loved reality more. He once said, acting's a job. Craft, this other stuff. That's the nonsense. So when fans spotted him walking down South William Street, carrying that loaf of bread and builder's tea like any man from Cork, it wasn't just funny. It was affirming, a reminder that this Hollywood megastar, who could have slipped away like so many before him, chose to stay. But staying grounded doesn't mean staying unchanged, because, over the years, something else was growing inside him, something quieter but more powerful than ambition. Responsibility to the roles. To portray characters with depth, intangible wounds, and quiet dignity. He once said, "I don't play heroes. I play human beings." That's exactly what he did in Peaky Blinders. For 9 years, Murphy carried Tommy Shelby like a ghost on his back. The show gave him global recognition, cult fandom, TikTok edits, street murals. But it also gave him insomnia, intense emotional exhaustion, a part of himself ground down and playing a man haunted by war, violence, and inner torment. During season 5, his wife Yvonne, a visual artist and the grounding compass in his life, told friends she could always feel when Cillian was becoming Tommy again. Shorter answers, cold detachment, a gaze that wasn't his. Even Murphy admitted, living with Shelby in your head for that long leaves a mark. He is not Tommy Shelby, not even close. But it's hard to shake off a ghost that big, especially when millions of fans chant your name and ask for more, and this is when many stars cave. They buy penthouses in Manhattan. They host SNL. They sell limited edition cologne. But what does Cillian Murphy do? He goes home. Again, raises his sons out of the limelight, helps his neighbor carry groceries, supports local Cork theater groups on the quiet. He does what any real Irishman does when the world gets too loud. He sits down, has a cup of tea, and reclaims his peace. In interviews, he rarely name drops, but mention Ireland, and he lights up the land. The language, the music, he still plays music. He still walks alone. He still describes fame as something to manage, not something to celebrate. When Oppenheimer brought him an Oscar, arguably the pinnacle of cinematic recognition, he gave a speech so humble, so precise, it felt like an Irish wake rather than a victory dance. He thanked his wife, his kids, Nolan, the cast, and then he said one thing that struck fans to their core. "I'm a very proud Irishman standing here tonight." It echoed, and suddenly Twitter, or X, as it now brands itself, exploded all over again. Not memes this time, not jokes, but pride, letters. From Irish teachers saying they showed their students the speech, videos of young actors saying Cillian taught me that you don't need to shout to be heard. Emotional threads from kids growing up in working-class Ireland who saw him win and thought, maybe I could too. All that because one man with eyes like storm clouds chose not to become bigger than his roots. He chose to grow within them. And this is why the tea and the pan and the coat still make everyone smile. Because it could have been your dad, your uncle, your best mate walking back from Centra on a rainy Tuesday morning. Because fame didn't change him, and more impressively, he didn't let Ida. True Irishman isn't defined by Guinness or Blarney Stones or theatrical accents. In films, a true Irishman like Cillian is defined by decency, by inner grit softened by compassion, by the refusal to perform unless it's on stage. There's a quiet heroism in that, the kind that doesn't ask for applause. You can now see why just being spotted with tea and bread became a phenomenon. It wasn't about the objects, it was a love letter to Ireland, to humility, to staying still in a moving world, and maybe, just maybe, that's what we all really want, not more fame or more flash, but more of this. More people who live like truth doesn't need a microphone, who carry home the sliced pan. One hand gripping a cup of tea, eyes somewhere far off in the horizon, but feet planted firmly on the soil that made them. Cillian Murphy didn't become a true Irishman when he picked up that cup. He always was. It just took one ordinary moment for the world to finally see it.